What's up, guys? If you're not subscribed, please subscribe. Also, please smash that like button on the video and enjoy the show.
2011, a series of uprisings across the Middle East. It's kind of like a democracy movement. Leaders overthrown in the case of, say, Tunisia. In Egypt, a military dictator is overthrown. So one country after the other has these uprisings. The one place where it didn't work so well was Syria, because there's a brutal dictator named Bashar-al-asad who rules Syria with an iron grip. And he decided, well, you guys demonstrators aren't going to win. I'm willing to be as brutal as I need to be to crush this uprising. And one of the things that Assad did after the uprising started, he actually let a bunch of bad guys out of jail. Some of those ended up kind of reforming into groups. So more importantly for the sort of history of this civil war was they invited their buddies across the border in Iraq, and that's where the real bad guys were. Zarqawi, who the leader of Al-Qaeda in Iraq, had developed this movement, which... And the map was drawn for kind of weird reasons anyway. This is all the way the Middle East looks now with the boundaries that do exist. It didn't happen because there was a river or there was a kingdom here. It was because the British and the French decided at the end of World War I that they were just going to carve up the Middle East into areas of interest. And so, Syria becomes, an area of French interest, and Palestine becomes a British area, and Jordan was a British area too. And all these eventually became countries, but the borders and boundaries make no sense because they cut right across tribal areas. So you got people from the same families on both sides. And as you mentioned, the terrain too, once you get away from the coast, a lot of it's just wild, wide open spaces, rocky deserts, sometimes really harsh areas. And one consequence is it's real easy to move stuff and to move bad guys across borders, and it happens all the time.
Well, maybe we should start here with Syria because it is so fascinating. And like I said, you wrote an entire book on it, which actually I left out there. My dumb ass, I'll bring that in. But first of all, when did you first start getting into the Syria story? Like, when did you have to cover it for the Washington Post? I assume it was before the chemical weapons were deployed?
Yeah, absolutely. So it actually was... Really, it was the start of the Arab Spring, and we're really kind of stretching our listeners' memories a little bit. But 2011, you have this series of uprisings across the Middle East. It's kind of like a democracy movement where you have, leaders overthrown in the case of say, Tunisia. In Egypt, a military dictator is overthrown. So one country after the other has these uprisings. And they're somewhat successful in the sense that people power succeeds in a lot of these places. The one place where it didn't work so well was Syria, because there's a brutal dictator named Bashar-al-Asad who rules Syria with an iron grip. And he decided, well, you demonstrators aren't going to win. And I'm willing to be as brutal as I need to be to crush this uprising. Was
he hereditary?
He was hereditary, but he wasn't meant to be the president. So his dad was the president, was a dictator before him. And Bashar al-Assad, when his turn after his father died, the job was actually supposed to go to his older brother, who was like smart, suave guy, had kind of a tough image. Bashar al-Assad, being a younger son, decided to be a dentist instead and went to England and got it. He was going to school. They said he was going to be, not a dentist. I misspoke on that. So an ophthalmologist, which is an even softer job. So there's no blood involved, which is the great irony. He's like the bloodiest tyrant in the Middle East for decades. And he apparently didn't like the sight of blood, though. So he went to ophthalmology school. But he's in Britain. Yeah, married a British woman. She's of Arab descent, but she's very, elegant, beautiful British wife. And actually people had high hopes for him after, before Arab Spring started. Like, Americans were going over there visiting. John F. Kerry went, and other sort of senior Americans went to try to build a relationship and try to make him go the right way and be a little less like his father and more like a normal leader. And that was going very, very good for a while until Arab Spring happened and the Civil War came about, and then he just became the most brutal tyrant unimaginable and just essentially decided to crush the rebellion with tanks and guns, and that's what happened after 2011.
Guys, if you'd like to join our Patreon by hitting the link in the description below, not only does it support our show and allow us to get great guests like this and put out more content, but you're going to get exclusive access to the Julian and Alessi show, which is the show we post only on Patreon. That's with my producer, Alessi Alaman, and I, as well as some behind-the-scenes content and some extra content with guests. So hit that link in the description below, and I hope to see you over there. Now, I think a lot of people will remember a main focus, obviously the Arab Spring was happening all over the place, but a main focus was in Egypt. I think it was it Hosni Mubarak?
Right.
Was that his name?
Mubarak.
He was overthrown. He was the longtime leader, and that brought in like a whole new government and everything. And then that kind of spread across all these countries. But when it was happening in Syria, was there, before that happened, were there already like some of these terrorist presence, whatever you could say, like setting up shop in the country? I'm forgetting some of the names. I know there's like Al-Nusra Front. There's some Al-Qaeda affiliates. Obviously, it turned into ISIS, some of them too. But like, were any of these guys really there yet? Or did that happen after 2011?
So the interesting thing is they were there, but they were in prison for the most part. And one of the things that Assad did after the uprising started was to try to turn it into, for public relations purposes, an uprising by extremists. So he tried to say, well, the people who are opposing my regime, they're fanatics and they're terrorists and horrible people. And as a self-fulfilling prophecy, or to kind of make that happen, he actually let a bunch of these bad guys out of jail.
Oh, my God.
And some of those ended up kind of reforming into groups. But more importantly for the sort of the history of this civil war was they invited their buddies across the border in Iraq, and that's where the real bad guys were. That's where Zarqawi, who the leader of Al-Qaeda in Iraq, had developed this movement, which became ISIS later.
Right.
So ISIS came over pretty much by invitation because there was a war going on. What a great place for a terrorist group to thrive. They've got plenty of weapons. They've got safe places where nobody's coming after them. A great opportunity to recruit. And so ISIS comes and takes over half the country by the time they've reached their zenith.
Like 2014, something
2014 is the year that they sort of established the caliphate and marched into Mosul, the second largest city in Iraq, and took it over and declared essentially a religious empire that spread from the eastern part of Syria across Iraq, and an area the size of Great Britain. So if you want to get a sense of how big that place was, it was a lot of area under the control of a terrorist group, which meant not just that they're in place there, but they have all the infrastructure of a government. They've got universities, they've got military bases, they've got tanks, they've got bank vaults full of gold, more money than they could ever spend. That's why the caliphate was so dangerous, because it just was terrorist plus, state infrastructure and wealth and weapons, and it just made them extraordinarily dangerous.
In the middle of all this, I mentioned this a few minutes ago, so I'd love to get some context on where they were during this, but have you ever read Nadi Murad's book?
I know of it, but I haven't actually read that.
Okay. Phenomenal book. I never want to read it again because it's heavy. She won the Nobel Peace Prize. She's a really, really amazing woman. She was a Yazidi who was kidnapped by ISIS. Her family was all killed. She was sold into slavery, the whole bit. But a lot of her story charted out those earliest days of the caliphate for me, like geographically, to see where things were. And the crazy part is that on the northern part of Iraq and along the southern part of Syria, there's like the Peshmerga and the Kurds, who are these poor people who don't have a country, which is kind of wild. But like, where are they in all? Like, that's what I didn't understand about ISIS being able to get into Syria. They had to go around the Kurds to do that, right? So did they just let them do that?
In the beginning, they didn't have much choice because the Kurds didn't really, they had their defense groups, but, ISIS just kind of bulldozed right through there, particularly in areas where the Yazidis are more populous, because that's kind of, that's a weak underbelly, so they're able to kind of push right through. The Kurds didn't really start fighting back until we helped them. And there was this interesting moment in 2014 where a lot of the Yazidis in particular were besieged on a mountain, and the Americans dropped first aid, and then they began to arm the Kurds in a way that they could start fighting back. And that was the beginning of pushing the ISIS back. When Raqqa, so the ISIS capital in Syria, was liberated, it was mostly because of these Kurds backed with American forces, essentially as intelligence and as ISR, like the drones and airstrikes. But they were the sort of the shock troops that pushed ISIS out of those areas. And the only reason that ISIS hasn't come back really is because of those Kurds and because we still back them today. Yeah,
I don't want to get off on a tangent there, but I've heard some things about where ISIS is now. It's not dead.
Yeah, it's not dead.
Which is scary.
And the further you get away from the Kurdish areas, so in Syrian-held areas, they're really coming back, and it's pretty long.
Oh, even up there?
Up there, yeah, except for the northeast corner, which is still kind of a little... Whoa. Yeah, but in Palmyra, which is this kind of a desert city, so a little bit... we can almost see it on the map, but it's an ancient Roman city. So it's kind of central, kind of south of Aleppo. But But Palmyra was, now it's almost become a no man's land because these ISIS groups, which kind of faded away after 2019, have been coming back, and they've been, knocking out army posts, threatening soldiers who are in the area, so they flee. And it's pretty disturbing. And people who are watching that closely say there's an opportunity for ISIS to come back, at least in that area.
Whoa, Leslie! Before I forget, you know the island there with the TV and the drawers below it. I have where the books are. I have Redline in there. Would you mind grabbing that? Yeah. And then Joby has 2 on the chair right outside the studio too. I just want to make sure I have that in here. Sorry about that.
And I'm seeing Palmyra. It's just south of Raqqa.
Oh yeah, I see it right here. Yeah. If we're looking at the screen right now, I think Alessi has it on that cam. Yeah. So it's kind of like it's like in the first third of the bottom of the TV in the middle, right there.
That was a remarkable area that, again, it was sort of a Roman settlement. So there's beautiful artifacts and museums just full of this antiquity. And ISIS came in with sledgehammers and just smashed it all up when they took over in 2014.
They just didn't care about anything.
No, they saw that as idolatry, and they just smashed just really valuable antiques and artifacts from those times.
Thank you for watching the video, guys. If you haven't already subscribed, please smash that subscribe button and check out this clip's full podcast episode by clicking here or in the description below.